The assassination of President Abraham Lincoln on April 14, 1865, ranks among the most transformative events in American history. His tragic death overshadowed the Civil War's final moments and triggered a massive manhunt that gripped an already wary nation. While the singular figure of John Wilkes Booth often dominates retellings, the truth is more intricate. Booth led a broader network of conspirators. These conspirators schemed to either abduct or murder the president, possibly targeting other high-ranking officials. Their secret dealings unfolded within boarding houses, taverns, and clandestine rendezvous, culminating in a shocking crime at Ford's Theater. In this extended magazine-style article, about 40,000 characters, we delve into the detailed backgrounds and roles of the key conspirators. We chart how their motivations coalesced into an audacious plan. From Mary Surratt's famous boarding house to the final judgments, we examine how each figure contributed to a conspiracy that forever changed the course of American history. A nation on the brink, setting the stage. The tensions of 1865. By early 1865, the American Civil War was drawing to a close. The Confederacy's resources were depleted. Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia was cornered by Ulysses S. Grant's Union forces. In March, Lincoln's second inaugural address advocated malice toward none, with charity for all, hinting at a conciliatory post-war approach. Yet not everyone embraced the idea of reconciliation. John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and fervent Confederate sympathizer, rejected Lincoln's vision. Born into a theatrical family in Maryland, Booth was outwardly charismatic but quietly consumed by the South's plight. Initially, Booth's resentment fueled a kidnapping plot. He intended to capture Lincoln, hold him hostage, and demand prisoner exchanges. Over time, frustration at the Confederacy's collapse, and possibly a thirst for vengeance, mutated this plan into lethal conspiracy. Seeds of the conspiracy. Even before Lee's surrender at Appomattox on April 9, 1865, Booth sought allies among other Confederate sympathizers, forging plans to abduct the president during public events. The conspirators believed that kidnapping Lincoln might force the Union to negotiate or at least secure better terms for the South. But as the war's outcome became inevitable, the group's desperation increased. The shift from abduction to outright assassination remains one of history's key turning points in political violence. The conspirators would gather in various Washington, D.C. locales, notably the boarding house of Mary Surratt, a central venue for clandestine meetings. Over time, additional personalities joined, some wholeheartedly, others roped in by personal loyalty or perceived duty. Let us examine each conspirator's background, role, and fate in this fateful plot. The core architect, John Wilkes Booth, early life and political passions. Birth and family. John Wilkes Booth was born on May 10, 1838, in Bel Air, Maryland, into a renowned acting dynasty. His father, the English-born actor Junius Brutus Booth, gained wide acclaim, while his older brother Edwin Booth became one of the era's greatest Shakespearean performers. Confederate leanings. Although Maryland remained a border state loyal to the Union, many of its citizens harbored Southern sympathies. Booth's fervor for the Confederacy was shaped by his environment and personal convictions. He viewed Lincoln as a tyrant who trampled states' rights and threatened his cultural identity. Acting career. By the early 1860s, Booth was a notable actor in theaters from Boston to New Orleans. Handsome, charismatic, he used his roguish charm to cultivate friendships across social lines. This public persona provided him cover for covert dealings. Kidnapping plans. Historians point to Booth's initial notion of kidnapping the president in early 1865. The original scheme aimed to seize Lincoln during a less guarded moment, perhaps en route to or from a public event. Booth believed exchanging Lincoln for Confederate POWs might revitalize the Southern war effort. Escalation to murder. As the Confederacy crumbled in April 1865, the conspirators learned that General Lee's surrender spelled near total defeat. Booth's anger soared. On April 11th, Lincoln spoke from the White House about limited black suffrage, a speech that outraged Booth. By some accounts, that night, Booth declared Lincoln must be killed. Plans swiftly shifted from abduction to simultaneous assassinations of Lincoln, Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Secretary of State William Seward. Ford's Theater. On April 14, 1865, Good Friday, Booth learned the Lincolns would attend the play Our American Cousin. With unparalleled familiarity with Ford's Theater, where he had performed, Booth easily maneuvered backstage. Around 10:15 p.m., Booth entered the presidential box and fired a single shot from his Derringer pistol into the back of Lincoln's head. He then stabbed Major Henry Rathbone, who tried to intervene, before vaulting over the rail onto the stage. Despite breaking his leg in the leap, Booth fled, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, the motto of Virginia. Escape and pursuit. Booth and co-conspirator David Herold fled on horseback, eventually crossing the Potomac River into rural Maryland. He believed he might find sanctuary among Confederate loyalists. Garrett Farm Standoff. 11 days later, on April 26, Union soldiers cornered Booth in a tobacco barn on Richard Garrett's property in Virginia. The barn was set aflame to force him out. Booth refused to surrender. A Union soldier, Boston Corbett, shot him. Booth died hours later, his final words allegedly referencing his useless hands. Booth's central role is indisputable. He was the orchestrator, uniting the conspirators under a single cause. Let us examine the others who played crucial if less infamous roles. Mary Surratt. The boarding house landlady, Mary Elizabeth Jenkins Surratt, was born in 1820 or 1823 in Maryland. She married John Harrison Surratt, with whom she had 3 children, Isaac, Anna, and John Jr. They owned land and taverns in D.C. and Maryland. After her husband's death in 1862, Mary moved to Washington, D.C. and opened a boarding house on H Street. Financial strains, along with Catholic faith and Southern-leaning sympathies, shaped her decisions. According to testimonies, Booth and his associates frequently gathered at Mary's boarding house. Mary's role remains contested. Some say she was an unwitting bystander. Others argue she knowingly harbored conspirators. On April 14th, Mary visited her tavern in Surrattsville, Maryland, instructing Tenant John M. Lloyd to have shooting irons ready for visitors. Prosecutors later asserted that these shooting irons referred to firearms stashed for the conspirators. This strongly implicated Mary in the plot's final moves. Authorities arrested Mary on April 17, 1865, after capturing multiple conspirators who named her lodging as a planning site. She was tried by a military commission alongside other conspirators. Despite pleas of ignorance, Mary Surratt was found guilty. On July 7, 1865, she was hanged, becoming the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government. Her guilt or innocence remains a subject of debate. Some argue she was a staunch Confederate ally who facilitated Booth's plot. Others consider her a scapegoat who hosted gatherings she did not fully understand. John Surratt, Jr., the elusive messenger, family ties, and Confederate couriers. John Surratt, Jr., Mary's son, was about 20 years old in 1865. During the war, he served as a Confederate courier and spy in the D.C. area. He established relationships with Booth, connecting him to underground Confederate networks. Historians widely believe that John Jr. participated in the kidnapping scheme from the outset, scouting routes and safe houses. His knowledge of rural roads around Washington made him valuable. Missing on April 14th, unlike other conspirators, John Surratt was not in Washington the night of Lincoln's assassination. He was reportedly in Elmira, New York, possibly on a mission. Realizing his precarious position, Surratt fled to Canada, then to Europe. He briefly joined the Pontifical Zouaves in Rome. Arrest, trial, and release. Eventually apprehended in Alexandria, Egypt, in late 1860s, Surratt was returned to the U.S. for trial. The civil court case ended in a mistrial, and charges were later dropped. John Surratt maintained he had no part in the murder plot. He lived until 1916, giving occasional public lectures. Some question if he escaped accountability for deeper involvement than he ever admitted. Lewis Powell, also known as Lewis Payne, was the assassin at Seward's door. A Confederate soldier turned conspirator, Powell was born in Alabama in 1844. He enlisted in the Confederate Army, serving under the 2nd Florida Infantry. Wounded and captured, he later deserted, meeting Booth in Baltimore. Powell's imposing physical presence and calm demeanor set him apart. Booth reputedly assigned him the mission to kill Secretary of State William Seward the same night Lincoln was shot. On April 14, 1865, around 10 p.m., Powell visited Seward's residence under the guise of delivering medicine. Seward, bedridden after a recent carriage accident, was resting. Powell forced his way inside, stabbing Seward's son Frederick in the process. He attacked Seward in his bed, slashing him multiple times. Seward's bandaged jaw brace helped deflect the blade, preventing a fatal wound. Powell fled into the night, disoriented, failing to meet co-conspirator David Herold as planned. A day later, he arrived at Mary Surratt's boarding house at an inopportune moment, only to be captured by officers already there. Powell's attorneys argued he was mentally unfit or heavily manipulated. Despite this, the military commission found him guilty. On July 7, 1865, Powell was hanged alongside Mary Surratt, David Herold, and George Atzerodt. His stoicism at the scaffold was noted by witnesses. David E. Herold, the accomplice on the run. Early life. Born in 1842 in Maryland, Herold was the child of a middle-class family. Some described him as impressionable, naive, and easily dominated by Booth's stronger personality. Introduction to Booth. Through Confederate sympathizing circles, Herold connected with Booth, assisting in errands. He also introduced Booth to certain Surratt Tavern contacts. Seward attack. Herold was tasked with guiding Powell to Seward's home, then fleeing with him. When Powell took longer than expected, Herold abandoned him. Escape with Booth. Immediately after Lincoln's shooting, Herold joined Booth, leading him along back roads into Maryland. He helped Booth find Dr. Samuel Mudd for medical treatment and attempted to orchestrate safe passage deeper into Confederate territory. Garrett Farm. On April 26, 1865, Union soldiers cornered both men at Richard Garrett's barn in Virginia. Herold surrendered immediately, while Booth refused and was shot. Trial and execution. Herold's involvement was indisputable. The commission concluded he knowingly participated in the assassination scheme. Hanged on July 7, 1865, Herold was among the 4 conspirators to face capital punishment. George Atzerodt, the would-be assassin of Andrew Johnson. A reluctant plotter. Origins. Born in Germany in 1835, Atzerodt immigrated to the U.S. as a child. By 1860s, he resided in Port Tobacco, Maryland, known for ferrying Confederate operatives across the Potomac. Connection to Booth. Booth tapped Atzerodt's knowledge of the smuggling routes. Atzerodt joined the group, likely seeing personal profit or misguided patriotism, assigned to kill the vice president. The plan. On April 14th, Booth assigned Atzerodt to assassinate Vice President Andrew Johnson at the Kirkwood House Hotel. However, Atzerodt's nerve faltered. He roamed the bar, reportedly drinking heavily, and never carried out the attempt. Flight. Alarmed by news of Lincoln's shooting, Atzerodt fled, leaving behind a loaded revolver and knife in his hotel room. Investigators easily traced him via the clutter he left behind. Arrest, trial, and execution. Capture. Within days, authorities arrested Atzerodt at his cousin's home in Maryland. Confession. He provided rambling statements claiming he only joined for a kidnapping plan. He insisted he did not intend murder. The commission, unconvinced, pronounced him guilty. Hanging. Like Powell, Herold, and Mary Surratt, Atzerodt was executed on July 7, 1865. Many historians depict him as the conspirator most regretful or cowardly, undone by his own timidity. Dr. Samuel A. Mudd, the doctor who treated Booth. Though not part of the core group that plotted Lincoln's killing, Dr. Samuel Mudd became infamous after giving medical aid to Booth. Mudd's background, birth and profession. Born 1833 in Maryland, Mudd was a local physician and plantation owner. A known Southern sympathizer, though the depth of his convictions is debated. Meeting Booth. Some evidence suggests Mudd met Booth in 1864, possibly to discuss real estate or to facilitate Confederate intelligence. The full nature of their acquaintance remains contentious. The night of April 15th, Booth's arrival. In the early hours of April 15th, Booth and Herold arrived at Mudd's farmhouse. Booth's left fibula was fractured. Mudd set the bone, provided a splint, and allowed them to rest. Knowledge or innocence? The core question is whether Mudd recognized Booth and suspected the crime. Mudd claimed he did not realize Booth was the assassin until after they departed. Critics argue he recognized Booth, but chose to abet his flight. Arrest, trial, and later life. Conviction. Mudd was found guilty by the military tribunal, receiving life imprisonment at Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas. He narrowly avoided the death penalty. Pardon. In 1869, President Andrew Johnson pardoned Mudd, swayed by Mudd's service during a yellow fever epidemic at Fort Jefferson. Mudd's family later waged a decades-long campaign to clear his name, but historical consensus remains divided. The military tribunal, justice or overreach? President Lincoln was murdered while the Civil War was still effectively in progress. Fearing further conspiracies, the new President Andrew Johnson insisted on a swift, stringent process. Under these conditions, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton orchestrated a military commission rather than a civilian trial. Commission composition: 9 Army officers, chaired by Judge Advocate General Joseph Holt, oversaw the proceedings. Their stated aim: address a conspiracy allegedly tied to Confederate leadership. Defense challenges: conspirators' defense lawyers had limited time for discovery. Evidence ranged from direct testimony, some contradictory, to circumstantial claims about visits, suspicious remarks, and preceding Confederate loyalties. Executions: Mary Surratt, Lewis Powell, David Herold, and George Atzerodt were hanged on July 7, 1865 in the Arsenal Penitentiary courtyard, just days after sentencing. Imprisonment: Samuel Mudd, Samuel Arnold, Michael O'Laughlin, and Edmund Spangler received various prison terms. Michael O'Laughlin died in prison, while the others were eventually pardoned. Controversy: many Americans questioned the constitutionality of trying civilians in a military court, an issue that resonates in subsequent legal debates. In 1866, the Supreme Court's ex parte Milligan decision criticized the usage of military tribunals when civilian courts functioned, though this ruling came too late for the conspirators. Samuel Arnold and Michael O'Laughlin. Arnold, a friend of Booth's from school days, participated in the kidnapping planning, but withdrew before the final assassination scheme. Sentenced to life imprisonment, he was later pardoned. O'Laughlin, another Maryland associate, was rumored to track Secretary of War Stanton on the fateful night, but lacked the nerve. He died of yellow fever at Fort Jefferson in 1867. Edmund Spangler. Spangler worked at Ford's Theater, occasionally assisting Booth. He was indicted for aiding Booth's escape by opening a door or stalling pursuers. Although he likely had minimal involvement, the commission sentenced him to 6 years. He was pardoned by Johnson in 1869. Alleged Confederate government link. Union authorities vigorously investigated whether Jefferson Davis's administration sanctioned the plot. Though no direct, conclusive evidence emerged, many Northerners believed the Confederate government had tacitly or indirectly spurred Booth's group. The question remains open in historical discourse. Lincoln's assassination was a profound trauma for the North. Millions grieved as the president's body was carried by train through multiple states, allowing mourners to pay last respects. The tragedy overshadowed the ex-Confederacy's final collapses. A wave of fury demanded swift, harsh retribution. Some statesmen and newspapers depicted the conspirators as monstrous traitors. The narrative grew that Mary Surratt's boarding house had been the lair of demonic assassins. Although legitimate evidence implicated the conspirators, the fervor for punishment overshadowed due process debates. On July 7, 1865, crowds gathered outside the old Arsenal Penitentiary. Mary Surratt, Powell, Herold, and Atzerodt were paraded to the gallows, legs and arms bound, hoods placed on their heads. Their swift hanging ended a sensational trial but left lingering questions about the fairness of convictions. How deeply did Mary Surratt involve herself? Did she deliberately conceal weapons, or was she an unwitting landlady? Some revisionists argue her Catholic identity and wartime prejudices stacked the deck against her. Others maintain she was intimately involved. Meanwhile, Dr. Mudd's actions remain a similarly divisive topic, with supporters insisting he merely performed his Hippocratic duty. One puzzle persists. Exactly when did Booth pivot from kidnapping to murder? Did all conspirators consent to this shift, or did some discover the lethal plan too late? The incomplete records from the conspirators' final days hamper definitive answers. While no smoking gun letter from Jefferson Davis or his cabinet endorsing Lincoln's assassination has surfaced, conspiracy theories linger. Some historians detect partial lines of influence, pointing to Confederate secret agents active in Canada and alleged attempts on Union leaders. Yet mainstream scholarship remains cautious, describing Booth's group as a quasi-independent cell. Cultural reflections. The myth and memory dramatizations and legends. The Lincoln assassination quickly integrated into American folklore and stage drama. In the late 19th century, penny press novels cast the conspirators in sensational extremes: Powell as a savage brute, Mary Surratt as either saintly victim or cunning hostess. 20th century media, from silent films to contemporary miniseries, continue to reinterpret these figures. Booth's infamous legacy. John Wilkes Booth's decision to assassinate Lincoln overshadowed his once promising acting career. He is widely reviled as a traitor, though some early lost cause narratives of the South portrayed him as a misguided patriot. Over time, mainstream American memory solidified him as the ultimate assassin. Historical sites. Ford's Theater, preserved as a historical site and museum. Visitors can see the presidential box and exhibits on the conspirators. Surratt House, located in Clinton, formerly Surrattsville, Maryland, it serves as a museum with interactive exhibits about Mary Surratt's role. Dr. Mudd House, the rural farmhouse, is now a museum, providing tours of the room where Booth's broken leg was set. In a twist of fate, Andrew Johnson, who narrowly escaped being killed by Atzerodt, became president upon Lincoln's death. The shift in leadership influenced Reconstruction policy, often criticized as lenient toward former Confederates, sowing seeds for future racial and regional tensions. Some conspiracists note the irony that one target of Booth's plot ended up guiding the post-war era. Mary Surratt's daughter, Anna, she tirelessly attempted to save her mother from hanging, pleading with President Johnson, but to no avail. Anna's life afterward was marked by sorrow and financial hardship. Booth's family, his brother Edwin Booth, was devastated. A revered actor, Edwin withdrew from public life temporarily, haunted by John's deed, though he later returned to the stage. The nation recognized its vulnerability. A single assassin had effectively changed the course of governance. This tragedy spurred more robust protective details for presidents and high officials in the decades to come, culminating in the formal establishment of the U.S. Secret Service's role in presidential security by the early 20th century. The Lincoln conspirators remain a chilling reminder that moments of national triumph, like the Civil War's end, can be marred by explosive violence. Each conspirator's background underscores the war's polarizing effect on everyday citizens. Some, like Lewis Powell, were ex-Confederate soldiers who found themselves entangled in extremist desperation. Others, like Mary Surratt, were caught at the intersection of loyalty, commerce, and suspicious alliances. Did they truly believe their actions would resurrect the Confederate cause or avenge the South's defeat? Or were they merely pawns of Booth's theatrical fervor? The broad consensus is that Booth's manipulative zeal overshadowed more ambiguous motivations among his co-plotters. Their stories highlight the complexity of rebellion's aftermath, where ideology can fester into fanaticism, leading to catastrophic events with far-reaching consequences. For Americans, the assassination shaped the post-war narrative. Without Lincoln's guiding compassion, Reconstruction faltered. A deeper sectional bitterness took root, complicating racial justice for generations. Meanwhile, the conspirators' rapid execution satisfied a thirst for immediate retribution, but left historians pondering the boundaries of justice in times of crisis. Over a century and a half later, curiosity about the conspirators continues. Researchers re-examine trial transcripts, diaries, or newly surfaced letters to glean fresh insights. The story is far from stagnant. Each new revelation can shift interpretations of the conspirators' agency and the swirling chaos of 1865. In the final measure, the Lincoln conspirators' saga stands as a stark chapter in the narrative of Civil War America. It shows how a fringe group's violent act can reverberate through a nation's psyche, altering the course of leadership at a pivotal moment. Their personalities, ranging from the cunning of Booth to the trembling indecision of Atzerodt, form a cautionary tapestry about how far ideological fervor and desperation might push ordinary individuals down the path of infamy. John Wilkes Booth, mastermind, shot Lincoln at Ford's Theater, April 14, 1865, killed during manhunt, April 26, 1865. Mary E. Surratt, owner of boarding house used for secret meetings, hanged on July 7, 1865. Lewis Powell Payne, attempted murder of Secretary Seward, hanged on July 7, 1865. David E. Harold, guided Booth's escape, accompanied Powell to Seward's home, hanged on July 7, 1865. George Atzerodt, assigned to kill VP Andrew Johnson, lost nerve, hanged on July 7, 1865. Dr. Samuel A. Mudd treated Booth's broken leg, alleged complicity debated. Life prison, later pardoned. John Surratt Jr., Confederate courier, implicated but absent on assassination night. Fled to Europe, mistrial, charges dropped. Samuel Arnold helped plan kidnapping but not the murder. Life prison, later pardoned. Michael O'Laughlin possibly shadowed Secretary Stanton on April 14th. Life prison, died in 1867. Edmund Spangler. Ford's theater stagehand, minor complicity in Booth's escape. 6 years, pardoned. Selected references and suggested reading. Steers, Edward, Blood on the Moon, The Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. University Press of Kentucky, 2000. Swanson, James L., Manhunt, The 12-Day Chase for Lincoln's Killer. HarperCollins, 2006. Clark, Asia Booth, The Unlocked Book, John Wilkes Booth. G. Putnam's Sons, 1938. Reprint of a memoir by Booth's sister with editorial commentary. Harris, Thomas M., Assassination of Lincoln, A History of the Trial of the Conspirators, Boston, 1892. Pittman, Ben, The Assassination of President Lincoln and the Trial of the Conspirators, 1865, official trial transcripts. Tidwell, William A., Come Retribution, The Confederate Secret Service and the Assassination of Lincoln, Univ Press of Mississippi, 1988. DeWitt, David M., The Judicial Murder of Mary E. Surratt, 1895. Kaufman, Michael W., American Brutus, John Wilkes Booth and the Lincoln Conspiracies, Random House, 2005.